briefed everyone that worked for him. They were swore to ultimate secrecy. There was absolutely no leaks within the system. He was guaranteed of that. He also made it a point to co-locate his engineers and his producers, the people who were building the airplane. So the engineer could come up with the drawing and he would walk out on the hangar floor and talk to the man who's bending metal.
Can't stress enough the engineers directly with the shop people all the time. And Kelly, when you had a problem, you'd have a meeting and decisions were made right then. He was always very fair. He could be very tough. He was no pussycat, I'll tell you.
Kelly's Skunk Works produced their first spy plane in 1955, the U-2. In an effort to evade Soviet radar, the U-2 was designed to fly at an altitude of 75,000 feet. In 1956, it began overflying the Soviet Union on reconnaissance missions. But the Soviets' latest radar systems were more advanced than had been anticipated.
When the U-2 flown by the CIA first began their operations over the Soviet Union, they were shocked to discover that the Soviets were tracking them even on the very first mission.
Every U-2 flown over the Soviet Union was in serious danger.
The U-2 was being tracked, and that was a great concern to not only to our country, but to Lockheed, who had promised that this airplane would never be seen.
Determined to create the ultimate spy plane, Kelly Johnson returned to the drawing board. He began designing a new supersonic aircraft that could fly faster and higher than the U-2 with the lowest possible presence on enemy radar screens. Then, on the 1st of May 1960, disaster struck. A U-2 flown by Francis Gary Powers was shot down by an SA-2 missile. Powers survived and had a very public trial, designed to humiliate the US and deter them from carrying out any further reconnaissance flights. But with tensions between the superpowers mounting, the need for reconnaissance was more urgent than ever. Kelly Johnson's plans for an advanced supersonic spy plane became the #1 priority. In order to create an aircraft capable of operating at the speeds and altitudes that Kelly envisaged, his Skunk Works team would have to overcome a series of huge technological problems.
And the biggest problem that he was going to face, and he knew this up front, was going to be temperature. The temperatures that the aircraft would encounter at those speeds, phenomenal.
It was clear that a traditional aluminium airframe would not withstand these extreme conditions.
You could not fly an airplane past 2.6 Mach, and you just barely make it then with aluminum because the airplane had just turned to jelly.
The decision was made to build the airframe from titanium. Titanium was both light enough to reach altitudes in excess of 80,000 feet and strong enough to withstand the enormous temperatures generated by Mach 3 flight.
No one had ever built an airplane out of titanium. So he had to begin from scratch. We didn't even have tools that you could use to develop titanium and to bend it and to shape it and to make an airplane. So we had to start by designing tools. It was a gigantic undertaking.
Creating an aircraft able to cruise at Mach 3 is difficult enough, but the Skunk Works also had to face the challenge of combining this level of performance with the new science of stealth. To avoid features that would create strong radar reflections, the plane had taken on a revolutionary shape. The wings were blended into the body, and the long surfaces on the forward fuselage, known as chines, were designed to deflect incoming radar waves. As were the inward-angled twin fins, the pointed engine cones, and the nearly flat lower fuselage. Also, a special radar-absorbent plastic, or composite, was developed to be incorporated into all the leading edges.
When you look at an SR-71, 20% of what you see is composite. You know, it's just unbelievable at that time. And it was developed in our shops. An SR-71 was 100 times smaller radar return than an F-14, which is only half as big and was developed 10 years later. So that was a really, truly first airplane specifically designed with stealth in mind.
On the 22nd of December 1964, the SR-71 was rolled out onto the flight line at Lockheed's Burbank plant. Coated in black, radar-absorbent ferrite paint, the Blackbird, as it became known, was an extraordinarily futuristic-looking machine. Lockheed test pilot Robert Gilliland would be the first in the cockpit.
When we got going, as a matter of fact, for the actual first flight, it had 383 open items. These are things that are supposed to be working that aren't working. So it was a bare bones type of operation for the first flight. And you might say these kind of things could be dangerous, but there are plenty of other people that would like to have been in my position, I assure you of that.
The exhilaration when we made the first engine run and they had those afterburners going in there and that thing is straining against those cables, I just felt, boy, this is really going to be something.
The flight lasted just over 1 hour, reaching top speeds of over 1,000 miles an hour, a phenomenal accomplishment for a first flight of any aircraft.
Kelly Johnson was there and some of his guests were there, and I don't remember who all else was there, but the whole kit and caboodle were very happy, including me.
It seemed that Kelly had created his ultimate spy plane. But would it be able to evade radar and fly high enough and fast enough to escape the Soviet fighters and missiles? Flying at speeds in excess of Mach 3, at altitudes over 80,000 feet, the SR-71 Blackbird was the fastest and highest flying jet in the world. In 1966, the first SR-71 spy plane was delivered to Beale Air Force Base in California. The first strategic reconnaissance squadron now needed an elite force of airmen to fly it.
Well, my first thought was, I sure hope that I'm selected for the program. I mean, that was ultimately selected for the program.
In order to qualify for the SR-71, you had to be very good at what you were doing thus far in your aviation career. In fact, you had to be pretty much the best at what you did to be considered as a candidate.
Each Blackbird needed 2 crew members, the pilot and the RSO, the Reconnaissance Systems Officer.
It was extremely exciting to just to get signed into Beale Air Force Base and to think that you're going to be flying this airplane. You cannot wait.
But the selection interviews and evaluations alone lasted a week and included a rigorous physical examination, the same as experienced by the astronaut corps.
And the first 2 days were physicals, an astronaut physical in a sense, taking an EKG on a treadmill and full body x-rays, just very extensive physical exam. They also wanted to know if you were the kind of person that they could live with on the road, because you had to spend a lot of time together. You know, in a sense, it's part of your family. And they wanted to evaluate people to see if they'd be a good member of that family.
The pilot began his actual training with long hours in T-38s and in the SR-71 simulator. The intense simulator sessions tested the crew members to their limits.
They basically made it a grueling experience. They would just give me multiple malfunctions to deal with. In fact, they just keep giving you another problem on top of another problem until you're juggling 5 or 6 or 7 balls at once. And eventually you have to start dropping them. And they would evaluate how you prioritized which ball do you drop.
After months of training, the crews were ready for their first flight together. The extreme speed and altitude called for special protection, and this came in the shape of the $120,000 pressure suit.
Two technicians suit you up. You step down into it, you put your arms into it, and it comes up to your back. The boots are separate from the suit, and they're just regular, real combat boots. The gloves are especially handmade for you, and they snap on with little O-rings onto your suit. Then when you put the helmet on, it's quite heavy, and once they snap it down, you hear yourself breathing. For a few moments there, you get some claustrophobia. I did anyway.
The suit was designed to have 100% oxygen in the nasal cavity area and then compressed air in the rest of the suit, so that if you were to lose cabin pressure at 80,000 feet or above, the nitrogen bubbles in your system would come out and your blood would boil. So you need some kind of an environment around you. That's what the pressure suit provided.
Suited up, the pilot and RSO are ready to be escorted out to the aircraft for their first flight together.
There are three people that do nothing but strap you into the cockpit. And unlike a lot of aircraft, this cockpit is down sort of in the bowels of the aircraft. You get placed down inside the cockpit and strapped in. And then the canopy is lowered on top of you. You don't even lower it yourself. Someone has to do that for you and lock it down. You're kind of becoming part of the aircraft. It's becoming part of you.
A shot of triethyl borane gas ignites the fuel, and the J-58 engines are started.
Where it really got impressive is when it starts taxiing out of the hangar. And it's 110 feet long, and so this thing keeps coming out, keeps coming out, keeps coming out, and all of a sudden you realize it's an awesome looking airplane as it gradually comes out of the hangar.
So here we're looking at an airplane that's going to be going 2,000 miles an hour, and its design is so futuristic. It's like no other airplane had ever been designed, because it was going to fly in an environment that no other airplane had ever been in.
Tower Aspen 30 is number 1 for takeoff.
I never forget how it feels to light those afterburners and feel one light before the other one does, and it jerks you pretty hard.
Max thrust.
And it accelerates rather rapidly. In just a matter of seconds, you're hitting 180 knots indicated airspeed, lifting off at 210, making sure you get the gear retracted before it overspeeds at 300 knots. And you keep pulling that nose up to try to achieve the 400-knot climb out. And in less than 2 minutes from brake release, you're pulling it out of afterburner, you're level at 24,000 feet. It's quite a ride.
I remember the first time I took the aircraft up to speed and to altitude, I went through Mach 1, and then I approached Mach 2, and it went through Mach 2 without the slightest indication of any problems, and I marveled at that. And then it rolled right on through Mach 3. Of course, none of us had ever been that fast before, but you did all of this effortlessly. And that was the feeling you had, that you had control of so much power on this aircraft that it was almost limitless.
As the SR-71 accelerates through Mach 3, the triple sonic boom is followed by a blast of heat radiating from its black skin that reaches temperatures of 1,100 degrees.
It truly flew through the air like a hot knife through butter. It really did. So it was pointy on every end, but it had elegance. But it was an elegance that was designed for performance.
After 10 months of grueling training, the SR-71 crews were ready to go operational. Flying over heavily defended areas in enemy territories would push both the aircraft and the crews to their limits. On March the 21st, 1968, the first SR-71 operational sortie was flown out of Kadena Air Force Base, Okinawa, Japan. The Vietnam War had been raging for 5 years, and the United States was determined to contain and defeat communism in Southeast Asia. The role of the SR-71 would be to gather photographic and electronic intelligence of their enemies. They would fly daily over territories where one mistake could cost the lives of the crew and provoke an international incident.
In this program, the margin for error was so narrow, almost to nothing, that it really was the pressure of flying the mission flawlessly. So that, because if anything went wrong, we would be on the 6 o'clock news.
SR-71 missions were always carefully planned. In their briefing, the crews thoroughly study the mission route and surveillance areas and are warned of potential enemy threats.
Well, we try to stay well informed about our adversaries' capabilities, about their ability to track our movement, our aircraft, any potential surface-to-air missiles that might be a threat to us, or any aircraft that might be a threat to us during flight.
3 hours before the mission, they have a medical checkup and eat a high-protein meal of steak and eggs. The crew chief and his staff spend hours inspecting the SR-71 for any possible mechanical problems.
Pre-flight on the aircraft starts around midnight. We're staying for a 6 or 7 o'clock launch in the morning. And there's a lot of procedures that you go through. Cameras have to be uploaded. The bays are in the forward section of the chimes, and then the cameras was electrically lifted up into it. We always loaded a light load of fuel for the mere fact that it's a lot easier on the airframe, it's a lot easier on the tires, the landing gear, and so forth like that.
There was always excitement in the air. It was electrifying. Every time you fly the airplane, everybody was keyed up. Everybody did their job and did it extremely well and took it very, very seriously.
Everybody worked together, and it was a team effort, and everybody knew that they was striving for that one thing, and it was perfection. The SR-71 demanded it because there was no room for error. When you get ready to launch the airplane there, things are happening so fast that you send the airplane off, and of course you're going to be concerned about whether or not it's going to come back. You're constantly thinking whether everything is correct or not, and those questions kind of creep into your mind.
Above 60,000 feet, the crew switches off all contact with air traffic control. Only a select few know where the Blackbird goes next.
The pilot in the SR-71 spent all of his time flying the airplane. The airplane operated on autopilot, that's true, but you had to kind of hand fly the autopilot. It demanded your attention all the time, and so the fellow in the back seat, the reconnaissance systems officer, he handled all of the auxiliary systems.
Sitting in the rear cockpit, the RSO must keep the plane on the black line, the pre-planned route to the target. As they reach enemy territory, he concentrates on the radar and defensive systems, trying to jam enemy communications in the event of a missile launch.
We carried the same type of jammer that was used throughout the Vietnam War by all of the fighters and bombers, which attempted to jam the communication between the radar site and the missile itself. Once they began the communication, our indications in the cockpit would go from warning to jamming, and it would be jamming that communication link to the missile.
But sometimes the enemy would try to attack the SR-71 by launching a missile without any radar guidance.
We were coming in off the water, headed inland, and the pilot says, "Hey, Reg, look out your right window." And here is what looks like a telephone pole about 150 yards away that's going just straight up. He said, "Was that close enough?" And I said, "Yeah, that was close enough."
Our main defense, if we were fired upon, was increased speed. And we could increase 100 knots, 200 knots in just a matter of seconds, which is a lot of differential in speed for a missile to cope with.
Approaching the target area, the RSO concentrates on operating the high-tech surveillance equipment. The 6 different cameras were able to photograph 100,000 square miles in an hour, producing images with such high resolution that a vehicle's number plate could be clearly identified.
The surveying capability of the aircraft was fantastic because you're going in a straight line for 2,000 miles. You could look out as far as the horizon goes, and from horizon to horizon, that's what you could survey.
For the crews flying in the top 1% of the atmosphere, it gave them a unique perspective on the world.
The first thing that you notice that's phenomenal is the change of the sky color. At about 60,000 feet, the sky turns a deep indigo steel blue that is so mesmerizing. You just want to look at it. It's fascinating.
You know, if I flew the aircraft up near the Arctic Circle, and I might actually traverse dawn to dusk and back 2 or 3 times. I've seen the sun rise and set 3 times on a flight, which is very unusual. I mean, we're actually flying faster than the Earth's rotation, so we're outrunning the sun.
On landing, the highest priority is to download the cameras, known as sensors, as quickly as possible.
Everyone was deeply concerned that their sensor performed as it was designed to do and programmed to do. So there was a lot of serious concerns there, and there was a lot of happiness because the plane had made a successful mission and the crews were home.
The films were then rushed off for processing and analysis.
Well, the photo interpreters were a brilliant bunch of young airmen, and they could look at that film and they could spot something had been moved or a new facility was going up. They were great at that. And they would call their supervisors if they saw something of interest, you know, that needed to be flagged and brought to the attention of the intelligence people.
One of the things I enjoyed about flying the Blackbird was knowing that information is power. The information we would gather could very well preclude bombs having to be dropped at all. It could save a lot of people's lives by having the right information at the right time.
The Blackbird crews were successfully infiltrating enemy territory and gathering a massive intelligence about their adversaries. But with the Iron Curtain still firmly in place and Soviet technology constantly improving, how long would the SR-71 remain flying safely in such dangerous areas? In October 1973, they would face their most crucial test. In the early 1970s, the world's attention focused on the Middle East. Tension between America's ally Israel and her Arab neighbors was reaching breaking point. On the 6th of October 1973, Soviet-backed Egypt and Syria attacked Israel and made dramatic territorial gains. With the Middle East caught up in the politics of the Cold War, an Israeli defeat would bring with it the threat of nuclear conflict. The Soviets had launched their Cosmos 596 satellite, bringing them immediate intelligence from the battlefronts and putting them one step ahead of the United States. It was time to bring in the Blackbird. The SR-71 would fly directly from Griffiths Air Force Base, New York, to the Middle East. The flight would be over 11 hours long, with 6 refuelings. No Blackbird crew member had ever experienced such a lengthy, complex mission.
I flew a 10.5-hour training flight, and I was beat. By the time I got out of the airplane, I said, whew, that's about as far as I can fly. But when they said you can fly 11 hours and 20 minutes, you jump up and you say, yes, sir, you know, I'll be happy to do that.
I picked Jim Shelton as the first pilot to fly the mission. I knew he was an extremely reliable, highly qualified, and had done extremely well in all of his training and everything. So I had total confidence that if the mission could be done, that Jim would do it.
On the 12th of October, under codename Giant Reach, the mission began.
We took off from Rome, New York around 1 or 2 in the morning, because you want to be over a target area somewhere between 11 and 1 o'clock. This allows you to have some shadows so the photo interpreters can go ahead and judge elevation, but yet get you the best sun position you can have.
By 10 o'clock in the morning, the SR-71 had reached its second refueling point over Portugal. Because of the highly classified nature of this mission, no one other than the tanker crew knew they were coming.
On the way into that particular refueling, the tanker crews said the Portuguese control kept calling out an airplane in relation to the tanker. And the tanker says, you know, we don't see anybody. Of course, they knew it was us, but I'm sure that they could tell on their scope something was happening because the two blips merged for a while, for 20 minutes, and then this one accelerates on.
Jim Shelton approached the Egyptian coastline. The Egyptians were well equipped, with their Soviet allies constantly replenishing their supplies.
Russia was developing the SA-5, which was a missile that would go up above, well above your altitude and come back down at you. And yes, that was a concern.
With 160 SAM missile sites, many secretly commanded by Soviets, and sophisticated radar tracking systems, they were on full-scale alert, watching the skies for any enemy infiltration.
As soon as we got into range of the Egyptian SAM sites, they started tracking us.
The Egyptians, alerted to an unidentified aircraft appearing on their radar systems and presuming the plane to be either Israeli or American, scrambled to launch their surface-to-air missiles. 80,000 feet above them, traveling at a speed of over Mach 3, Jim Shelton's Blackbird was gathering thousands of feet of film, capturing the extent and whereabouts of the Egyptian military forces.
You had the radar receiver in the back cockpit. Gary could tell me that, yes, now we're being tracked by some SAM missile. We need to do something. So at that particular point, we would jam, we would speed up.
By the time the Egyptian missiles were ready to fire, the SR-71 had already cleared their airspace and was speeding towards Israel. But the heavily armed Israelis also had no knowledge of this covert Blackbird operation and immediately went on full alert.
When we rolled in on the first pass over Israel, my defensive system just lighted up like a pinball machine. And I indicated to my pilot, I got all these indications back here. I said, just, you know, maybe keep your eyes open because it seems like somebody's shooting at us.
Despite launching a barrage of missiles, the Israelis did not manage to shoot their presumed enemy out of the sky. The Blackbird headed back to the United States.
We got everything we were tasked for, got the airplane back, and that's the first time airplane, the SR-71, had flown 11 hours and 20 minutes. After we land, the next couple of days, Gary and I get invited to the Pentagon. Admiral Moore, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, wanted to thank us for the work that we had done, and they showed us some photos.
The photographs were detailed enough to show how many Israeli tanks had been destroyed in the initial battles.
We were to go ahead and resupply the Israelis with some of their lost equipment. So the photo interpreters are counting the number of tanks that we would be replacing. So it was a very crucial point for the SR-71.
It was a very sensitive mission, and there was a lot of pressure to get that first one done. Jim and his backseater nailed them. He got all the targets, and everyone was absolutely elated.